Welcome to Black Men Speak. I'm your co-host J.R. Stewart.
And I'm your co-host, Tommy Duncan. It is Wednesday night, and if it is Wednesday night, it is Black
Black Men
Men Speak.
Speak. That is correct. So, Tom, we want to give a shout out to Liquid for providing our theme music. And for those of you who are tuning in, if you have not already subscribed, please subscribe and hit the notification button so you'll be notified when our new shows are uploaded, which is every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Central Time. And also, spread the word. Invite a friend to come watch next time you decide to tune in. So, Tom, what is our interesting, fascinating topic for tonight?
Interesting and fascinating as some people may or may not consider this to be. We are now looking on national news as to the trials related to the Ahmaud Arbery
Yes.
death here a year or so ago now, and we're talking about the impact of police killings on the Black community, the impact of police killings in Black America, Jimmy. And we have had so many highly publicized deaths
Yes.
within our communities that have been unfortunately related to the law enforcement community, Jimmy. And, it seems like you can't seem to get past one until you see another high profile killing that happens within our community. But really, what we want to focus on today is not on specific cases or specific incidents, even though we know that they are all relevant, but talking about the community's response when we look at the psychology and the pathology as to what I would call this trauma over a period of so many generations has done to and through our community, and what dialogue do we need to have about this in our response to it, not only to ensure that our communities are safer, but we are taking responsibility and ensuring that we can take care of our families and our communities. But it is not a simple conversation, Jimmy.
No, it's not a simple conversation, Tom. And unfortunately, we have a very long history with law enforcement. It's not always positive. Of course, you know that the original police and sheriff and deputies were basically organized to, either retrieve slaves or to round black people up and force them into servitude even after they were free. So
Yes.
our history has not always been positive with law enforcement. But I do question, why our situation with law enforcement is so publicized when other groups have. I'm sure maybe they do. I don't, it's hard to even tell based on the news today. You would think that police are only shooting and killing black people.
Yeah, Jimmy, I think, you bring up an interesting point, and they're not, we know that obviously law enforcement agencies aren't just using lethal force on the Black community, Black men and Black women. I think what comes to light in what we see in mass media are the circumstances surrounding that, so to speak. I mean, if we look at the numbers, obviously we understand that the white community is 65 some percent of the total population. So when you look numerically, obviously when you look at the lethal results of what's going on numerically, obviously the majority white community, numerically there are more deaths there. But when you look at holding for the percentage of other communities compared to the white community when it comes to lethal force used by law enforcement, that's where it comes. And then also the circumstances, Jimmy, because when you look at the number of unarmed American citizens within our community who unfortunately die of lethal force, that's the other thing that gets a lot of people's rage and attention in our country. And obviously the biggest one, George Floyd, just a couple of years ago. And the thing about it is, you're going to see folks who may feel that they are being unjustly targeted by law enforcement. But when we look at lethal force used on unarmed citizens, that just seems to be highlighted in mass media. And that is what we're talking about. How do we respond to that? How do we do that? How do we change that narrative?
Well, Tom, we've talked about the media on this show many times, and we know that mass media does not have our best interest. When I say our, I mean black, collective black people, the black nation, um, here domestically or even internationally. They don't have our best interests at heart. And when they publicize these killings, they still do not have our best interests at heart. I think they publicize these cases. The more success, and I could be wrong, although I think I'm documented to be 99.5% correct. But I could be wrong on this one, Tom. But you can share your thoughts. I think the more success black people have in this country, the more the more that others who feel threatened by that are going to make sure they have a control mechanism, i.e., the police, to keep us in check. If they publicize these shootings and killings and incidents enough times, they will invoke and instill a fear in us that they will not let reside. Well, it'll never go because they won't let it go for us. We're going to constantly be reminded that the police are out there and they have guns and they have used them against people and they'll use them against you. That's going to be the message there, in order to invoke fear in the black community.
And Jimmy, I think that's part of the point. So when you spoke at the beginning of that show, and you talked about how the law enforcement arm in America has been used in order to control the black community,
Oh, yes.
or basically being used by those who had power and control in this country in order to subdue those who they felt were either lower than them
Yes.
or who in essence belonged to them. I mean, that in essence is what we're dealing with here. So when you consider that mass media is controlled by a couple of small families, and unlike other industries, they buy up a lot of the television stations, they buy up a lot of
Yes, they do.
radio companies, and they control the messaging, they control the narrative. And so I can't disagree with you in terms of it being used as a mechanism to control the black community.
Now, Tom, if now we don't talk about this. When I say we, I mean black people. We don't just sit around at the dinner table talking about our interactions with police, but I think if we did, if we were to have some really open conversations, and people were to admit to just how scared they are when they're pulled over, when those lights are blinking, not knowing what's going to happen when that officer comes up, walks up on your car, and you have to roll the window down or step out of the car and deal with them, especially at night, in an area where there may not be the most light or any witnesses around. I mean, that still scares a lot of people. And it doesn't matter your profession, your background, your education level. If you're black and you're pulled over by cops, that is a very frightening interaction. Maybe not for other people, but for us, it still invokes fear. And I think that's the goal, to make sure, because I think there are people out there who are afraid of black progress. And without some way to keep us in check, that we may actually reach our true potential and take over this country.
Well, Jimmy, I mean, in principle, I understand where you're coming from. We know that law enforcement historically has been used in order to control progress. And quite frankly, Jimmy, if we look at this, whether it was prior to the Emancipation Proclamation or after the
Right.
proclamation, it's just that during slavery, obviously, the slave holders and owners controlled every mechanism of control. But even after the Emancipation Proclamation, let's be very clear, the KKK were wearing a badge as well. And let's be very clear, it's
Oh
been
yeah,
very
Tom.
well documented.
Lots of law enforcement during the height of the KKK were in law enforcement, especially in the South.
Exactly. And it's
Judgeships
all.
and law enforcement. So if you got caught up in the system, then it was not a pleasant experience for you.
And then even if you look at it today, it has been well documented that there are, a lot of white supremacists that have infiltrated law enforcement today, and they use that as a mechanism to be able to, without impunity, and with authority, to do what they will in order to suppress and or break the black community, because they have a badge, they have a gun, and they have the authority to do so at will.
Well, yes, Tom. I'm pretty sure that happens. Hopefully less frequently than it did in the past. But let's look at the long-term impact of all this fear that's been built up. Because I submit that there are probably some cases where black folks are running from the police out of fear, or make some movement that could be construed as threatening out of fear. When you are that afraid for your life, there's no telling what you. All you're thinking about is how to protect yourself. And I'm pretty sure the thought of flight comes into mind, or uncontrolled movements or hand gestures may come to mind also. So I would suggest that when you're dealing with law enforcement, one, try to be as respectful as possible. Do everything possible to defuse the situation. Do not give them a reason to feel threatened or to pull their gun out, because bad things tend to happen to us when their gun comes out. Um, and then it's very difficult. We until here recently, we got a few convictions here recently for bad policing, but generally, historically, Tom, it's been very difficult to convict law enforcement officers of crimes. So,
It's almost impossible, Jimmy,
oh,
because
it is.
you have the same element, in a lot of cases, and I personally believe that the majority of folks who have invested their life, into serving and protecting, our communities, good people, but you have too many, way too many folks who unfortunately are bad apples, who look at it as a mechanism of control of our communities, and let's be very clear, Jimmy. It's very, very rare that you're going to see a conviction, even when the evidence is overwhelming that there are bad actors who are doing things outside of the framework of the law, Jimmy. Almost impossible. So the question then becomes, and I understand that you do the best you can to diffuse the situation, but sometimes they don't care if you're trying to diffuse the situation. They're looking for something, and they're looking for a reason to put you into the ground, to take you down, and possibly to put a bullet, in your body, if not in your head, for no good reason, just because they don't like who you are, not knowing you from Adam. And so part of it, Jimmy, and we probably talked about this on our shows, understanding the circumstances that you're in, because I'm pretty sure that all of us have been in this situation before, understanding to at least to some degree the law and how you can use the law to protect yourself when you are in those situations. Saying the right thing or saying nothing at all potentially can mean the difference between life and death.
Well,
But
Tom, go ahead.
understanding the law, understanding the standard operating procedures and the law is at least a foundation of being able to handle yourself with confidence.
Well, Tom, let me see. When I was younger, of course, just starting off in life, married with a daughter, we didn't have very much money. We were probably legally poor, trying to come up. During that time, I had two really bad experiences with law enforcement. Now I've noticed that I'm on the other side of that spectrum now. Financially, I'm fairly well off. I have a little security. I'm not rich, but I have no threat of being poor anytime soon. Um, I live in a nice house. I drive nice cars, and I have no problems now with law enforcement, especially the city that I'm in. I often speak to as many cops as possible to let them thank them for the work that they do in keeping us safe. And if I am pulled over, I have been pulled over a few times in a better situation. And I believe by being courteous, respectful, and and letting them know that I appreciate the work that they're doing, I haven't gotten a ticket in time, probably about 30 years. Not that I'm a better driver or a safer driver.
I wish I could say the same, Jimmy. I've got to be.
I gotten pulled over a few times, Tom, and I'm telling you, it does help to speak pleasant, to be respectful and to be courteous, and let them know that you value their life. Let them know that you look at them as a human being. And I mean, I've gotten just warning after warning and let go, and then it helps when you're in a smaller city like I'm in now, versus when I lived in a larger city. But it works in a larger city, even when I lived in Dallas, and got pulled over a few times. But even in the city that I'm in, I mean, I'm making a point now that I've gotten to know the chief of police and some of the higher ups and the police department. Like I said, I speak to a lot of officers when I see them on the street as much as possible, and I do that time not that I'm trying to butter up or kiss up to anyone, but I do that for a couple of reasons. One, to let them know that there are black people out here who do not view them as their enemy. And so if you encounter me again under different circumstances, I don't want you to view me as your enemy. I want you to hopefully remember that hey, I was that guy that had some really nice words to say about you, and encourage you to stay safe while you're out here on these streets protecting all of us. And so I think that there's something to be said, that we have to make sure that we have the right attitude. So when I say diffuse a situation, that's what I'm talking about. Don't get into a confrontation, a battle of words. Don't play lawyer on the street and start talking about your rights. Just comply. And anything that you think was done wrong procedurally, file the complaint afterwards. But at least you're living to file that complaint. If this thing escalates and get out of control in some of the situations where I've seen lethal force used, Tom, there wasn't a whole lot there to at the root of it to cause this. So it doesn't take much to find yourself in a chokehold or being shot. So don't let it even get a step out of line. Keep it in a controllable situation as best you can. Now, if someone's just a bad apple, Tom, and a bad seed, then like I said, you can't do a whole lot about that other than to do everything you can to survive the situation. But also, people, make sure that when you encounter bad seeds, you have to file a complaint. Um, I was surprised that in the what was it in the George Floyd case, the Chauvin officer had numerous complaints filed against him. How in the
Nothing happened.
world, with 14, 15 complaints filed against you, and Tom, if you got 15 complaints over a 20-year history, that's probably just a tip of the iceberg. Those are the ones who had the courage to come file a complaint. And I'd imagine that probably a few of those were just white people that you spoke to crazy. But there were probably hundreds of people that had a bad interaction with this guy. So he should have been off the streets a long time ago, but still give the system a chance to work. Do your part by going and filing the complaint and then sticking with it.
But that was a situation, Jimmy, unfortunately, where the system wasn't working because clearly, given his behavior over several years,
I know,
not one
Tom,
or
that's
two
true.
incidents, and this is when the system has failed. This is when the system doesn't work, and unfortunately, it is led number one to a wrongful death of something that didn't warrant a death. And then obviously, when you look at the entire law enforcement community, the entire law enforcement community suffers because of someone who was not willing to
Right.
hold someone accountable who clearly did not need to have a badge. And so when you look at situations like that over and over again, and the fortunate thing is that it was in a major metropolitan area, there were plenty of cameras. It was literally, recorded by several
Oh, yeah,
cameras, and it was
lots of footage, Tom.
and it was on public blast. But the question is, that's the tip of the iceberg. How many other incidents didn't get caught where the
Right.
same thing, if not worse, happened? And so when you get into our thesis, the impact of police killings on the black community, when you look at this year after year, decade after decade, generation after generation, I mean, as a community, you become frustrated, you become angry. I mean, it's almost, and you can probably speak to this, Jimmy. It's almost like coming back from military conflict and you're dealing with death, you're dealing with the trauma, from explosions all over the place. You come back
Right.
home to what's considered to be a normal life, but you're not normal anymore. But you're talking about, let's say, being in armed conflict for, I don't know, 4 or 8 years. God bless those, who have been serving our country overseas. But when you're coming back, you're not normal anymore. The
No,
only
Tom, you're
difference
not.
is with this, these are incidents that happen period after period after period, year after year. And then some of the psychology, some of the fear, some of the frustration carries on from, grandparent to parent to child and generation after generation. It is almost exactly, case in point, PTSD, post traumatic stress syndrome, that is carried over from generation after generation because, quite frankly, it's never ever resolved and dealt with.
Well, Tom, to add to your point, and the point I was making earlier is that when the mass media only highlights these situations when we're involved, not to say that someone else dying will make it easier, but this is all you see for the most part. We don't see cops shooting white people, killing white people. We don't see protests over that, or Hispanics or Asians. I'm sure it happens, um, but we
but
don't.
not at the same rate. Clearly, not at the same rate.
Okay, I think our rate is actually pretty low. We have one of the lowest rates.
No, no, Jimmy. I mean, it's. I mean, I was, doing some research on this. I mean, and this is, Harvard is kind of a reputable,
Right.
kind of a reputable. I mean, they said, black folks in America are three times as likely, and this is a recent study, three times as likely to be killed by police officers than their white counterparts. I mean, I think that's a conservative estimate when we're thinking
Well,
only three times.
okay, then they're counting interactions with law enforcement, but if you look at actual
No,
numbers,
they're talking about deaths. They
right?
didn't
But
say interaction. They're talking about
I
deaths.
don't know what the numbers were for 2020, but I know in 2019 it was 12, and I think the year before that it was 14, and I think in 2020, if I remember correctly, it actually went down to 10 or 11. So it's kind of questionable. But when you're talking 10 million interactions that law enforcement have with the public every year, and you're talking about 10 people on average dying, 10 deaths time out of almost 40 million black folks here, and not to diminish anybody's death, but that's not that many overall. I mean, that is a pretty low number when you compare to the total number of white people who die, by law enforcement, which is much higher. But you're right; they're a much larger chunk of the population. But when you have more interactions with law enforcement, which we do, so since we have a lot more interactions, we're a smaller group. Then yes, we are three times more likely. But that don't mean that we have three times more deaths. It just means that do your best to stay away from law enforcement. Because yeah, the more you interact with them, the more bad things can happen to you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can't speak for everybody, but I don't think there are too many folks in our community who are just looking to engage with law
Well,
enforcement.
Tom,
Jimmy,
I mean,
that
I
just, I
understand.
don't know. No, I can't speak. Maybe your family. I don't know too many people in my community who are just looking to engage with law
Well,
enforcement
Tom,
unless they got
the
burglarized.
biggest thing that kills us sometimes is sometimes our cars are not legal. So black folks, please,
Well,
if you
Jimmy,
own a car, get it registered, have insurance, do the inspection. Don't give them a reason to pull you over. Don't make turns that you're not supposed to. Don't change lanes without signaling. I mean, do all the right things because you're right, Tom. If they see you breaking the law, some of them
if
are
they
look.
don't see you, if they don't see you breaking the law,
Well,
sometimes Jimmy, they're looking for
they are
something, and
looking,
that's what
Tom.
it's called profiling,
It
Jimmy.
is
It's
called
called
profiling,
profiling.
Tom. And then
and,
when
and and young, you mentioned when you were young,
right,
and I also had situations like that when I was young. Jimmy, I was driving in a neighborhood at light after leaving the library, going to school. I wasn't speeding, driving in a community,
but you fit the
going back
profile,
to my
Tom.
apartment, and I fit the profile of.
That's
I
right.
mean, it's just Jimmy, and I hate to say it like this, but Dave Chappelle. I was listening to a clip by Dave Chappelle, and he was talking about how black men are stopped so much, and he's like, I don't blame it on the law enforcement. Say, you know who I blame? That damn sketch artist who gives this generic profile of
Yes,
every black
I heard
man, and
that
so
skit. That is funny.
they have a tendency. Every black man looks like this one profile. I mean, I
Yes.
say that tongue in cheek, but I don't know too many young black men who don't have at least a few stories about
Oh,
being
Tom, you
stopped
can't be black and not have
intentionally.
a story.
And so you're being targeted, you're being
Right.
profiled, and I just don't know who many. But getting back to the point, impact of police killings in our communities in particular, when you look at the trauma,
Hmm.
you consider the stress and what you spoke to a little bit earlier, the anxiety. I mean,
Oh,
Jimmy,
definitely.
even
Yes.
if you're just walking down the street in your own neighborhood, if you're driving to the grocery store, if
Hmm.
you're going to pick up, just the presence of law enforcement, God forbid they have on the siren light, it creates anxiety
Tom, they could just
because
pull up behind you without the lights. Just seeing them in
exactly.
your rearview mirror can
And,
cause
and you're automatically
anxiety.
thinking, okay, what did I do wrong? What's going on? Jimmy, compare this. I was on a flight a couple of weeks ago, And there's a Caucasian lady that was sitting, behind me on the flight. And this lady was literally bragging about having
I remember
cursed
you
out,
told me.
cursed out a law enforcement officer. I mean, like it was some type of game. And clearly we know that if it was a black woman, she's probably lucky to just be in jail if she cursed out
Well,
a law
if it's a
enforcement officer.
black person, there's a good chance you would be arrested for assaulting an officer. Do not,
Exactly.
under any circumstance, curse them out. Just don't do it, because if you say something like that they construe as a verb, that construes some kind of action against them, you could be charged with assault. And you're right. A white person could probably easily get away with it. A black person may end up in jail. So do not follow your white counterparts, because we have not advanced enough where black people can get away with that. Maybe some, if you're a celebrity, if you LeBron James, you could probably get away with it. But
I
uh,
don't know, Jimmy.
but the
I don't
rest of
know.
us,
I don't
hey,
know.
need
I
to be
mean,
careful.
I mean, hey, I don't know. I would say LeBron, you better be careful what neighborhood you in. I don't care how much
Well,
money and
LeBron's
fame
not
you
going to be
have.
in the wrong neighborhood to start with, and I'm sure he's shuffled and limoed and driven every place he goes. So I think it's safe to say that he's okay. But the
Well,
rest
Jimmy,
of
I
us
don't
need to be
know. And,
careful.
and, and, and the reason I say that is this: it's a part of being in America and looking like you and me. There are some folk who are of the mindset that just because you are black and male in America, you should not have power. You should not have control over your destiny. And they will do anything within their power to convince you that I don't care how much money, how much power, or how much prestige you seem to have because you are a baller, you are a CEO, you are an attorney, that I could be broke down, but I'm still above you. And there are people who live in this country who are of the mindset that just because I happen to look like I look, I am above you. I don't care what you've accomplished. I don't care how many degrees you have. I don't care what you've accomplished. And like
Right, Tom, but
I
we
could have
don't
just got out of
concern.
jail.
Right, we don't concern ourselves with those ignorant people. Hopefully, we don't interact with them, and hopefully, we don't give them any kind of control or power over our lives. There are
But some
ignorant,
of those folks have a badge, Jimmy. That's my point.
and let's let the system work. File your complaints. I mean, Tom, there's nothing else you can do in those situations. If someone makes a bad hire, then that's the end result. And those cities and municipalities have to deal with that. They have to find ways to purge their ranks of bad officers. That's something that hopefully their internal affairs department are constantly working on. But if you don't file complaints, you don't make them aware that they have bad seeds. Now in Minneapolis, I don't know how someone with that many complaints against them stayed on the force and is out training people on how to become a lawyer. And this person in a leadership position. You're training
I'm
junior
telling you, Jimmy.
officers.
Again, the only reason that he was still in the force, on the force, is because of privilege. That's the only reason.
Tom, I wouldn't disagree with you so much. I'm gonna take a different stab at this. He's there because the chief of police allowed him to be there, and that chief of
Of
police
course.
is there because the mayor allowed him or her to be there. And so, when you have bad policing people, and you know this, then you have to do something about it. You have to vote your leadership out of office. If your mayor is not going to do anything about it and deal with the chief of police, have the chief of police do something about bad policing, then you have to find a way to get rid of that mayor with the understanding that we're going to replace you and the new person is going to fire the chief of police and the new chief would do something about my complaint or my issue or protect my neighborhood. But if you don't do these things, Tom, if you keep voting the same knuckleheads in year after year to have some kind of control over you, then as far as they're concerned, you are approving exactly what they're doing.
Gotcha. So, what do we do about this? And before we get to the second half of our show, Jimmy, we
Hmm.
do have a call in number.
Yes,
I
we
can't
do.
see it. I can't see it per se, but for those who are
It's
listening out there tonight
four eight
live,
four 841 4618. It is scrolling right below us. The PIN number is 664 356 176 pound.
man, that's a lot of numbers. You need to repeat that, Jimmy. 484 what now?
Okay, you gotta wait for it to roll around again. 484 841 4618.
Okay.
And then the PIN is 664 356 176 pound. Now, people,
Jimmy,
we do want to hear from you, so please call in, or the chat room is open. You can
and
text us your comments.
this will, if you call that number, I believe it brings up a gray avatar. We won't see you directly, but I believe it brings you straight into the screen so you can
Straight
ask your question.
into us, Tom.
Okay, good deal. Well, I'm hoping and waiting to hear from someone out there who has some thoughts on this subject in particular, because I mean, there are a couple of things that I think we have to deal with. There are certain things that we can control, and there are certain things that we cannot control. So, I mean, if we look historically, in this country, there was a point in time where Africans in America were finding some parity in terms of their, I won't say political strength, but their social strength. What did that look like? Population. That meaning that the Europeans who had brought Africans to build this country here brought so many over that they realized that the number of Africans in America, even though they were enslaved, were beginning to grow to a proportion where they felt threatened. And so then they had to come up, of course, with some political strategy in order to ensure that they could maintain control over a growing number of Africans and Americans. So if we look at that today, we're only somewhere between what, maybe 12 to 13%
Really over
of the, of,
13%
of
of
the
the
population
population.
in the United States. But Jimmy, if you have political capital, if you have social power, then you have to figure out how to leverage that to your interest. If we look at if we're looking at a political power, we're talking about obviously leveraging your vote based upon your collective interests. We know that everybody doesn't think alike, everybody doesn't have the same religion, everybody doesn't have the same political affiliation, but being able to vote your collective interest is something that we have to have a conversation about. Number two, Jimmy, we talked about understanding the law. We don't expect everybody to be an attorney, but what you do have to understand is there is public records as to what power you have as a citizen when you engage with law enforcement, what their training is, and how they should conduct themselves and how you should engage with them in different situations. And that is public record. And so we do need to at least have a foundation, a cursory understanding of the guidelines that govern our police departments and our sheriff's offices. So when we have these engagements with them, whether they are I had a flat tire or whether it's a dark street in the wrong place, you understand the power that you do have. And so you have to have the knowledge. Obviously, as Jimmy talked to a little bit earlier, if the mayor is appointing a police chief who is maintaining folks on their force that are not protecting and serving your communities, but they are policing your communities and or trying to subdue your communities, you do have some political power to make a difference there, Jimmy. And then obviously you look at social power as well, because to your point a little bit earlier, yeah, mass media does have a tendency to focus on certain areas, but at the same time, we can leverage that same platform, mass media, towards our interests. We just have to understand how the system works. And more importantly, Jimmy, we have to build and control our own institutions and our own systems. And one of the reasons why we have Black men speak, so that we can inform and empower people to make a difference in their communities, starting in their households and then evolving into their communities.
Well, I think we have a comment in the chat room from Southern South, and
Okay.
Southern South. Yes, we covered the point, and you're right on. This is a control mechanism by those in power to keep blacks in order. Basically his comment. And so, Tom, we have cities where black people, a lot of times, are the balance of power. Other votes are split, and black people pretty much can decide the outcome of the city leadership. Black city councilmen and aldermen. Black politicians all over the place, and yet some of these cities that are run by black folks are some of the areas where you have some of the most problems. And so, once again, if you don't speak up, if you don't vote your conscience, if you don't file complaints, and you don't hold people accountable by letting them know that if bad policing doesn't stop, if poor schooling does not stop, if you don't fix the streets and the infrastructure in our communities, if that doesn't stop, we're going to vote you out of office. But if you keep voting for these people who are creating these conditions, then as far as they're concerned, you are happy with the outcome that they are producing because you keep voting for them. Every time you vote for them, you are validating that you accept their leadership and the outcome of their leadership. So
Yeah,
so we,
Jimmy,
we
and
so we got to become a little more astute, Tom, like you were speaking to earlier. And then on top of that, Tom, here's what I'm going to say on the rights. Every city, every state have different rules as far as interacting with law enforcement. But let me say this: if you are driving a car, you are obligated to demonstrate that you have a license to drive that car. So you have to ID if you're driving. If you're in a passenger seat, you may not have to ID, but it doesn't take very much for a officer to claim reasonable suspicion to ask you to ID yourself. And then if you refuse, then of course they can act on that suspicion and bring in drug sniffing dogs and possibly even arrest you for refusing to ID. So, it's a slippery slope. I don't want our people out here playing lawyer with law enforcement because there is a lot of wiggle room for them, Tom. Even when you have a right to say, well, I don't have to ID if you ask me for my ID, but keep in mind that that's under normal circumstances when you're not considered or there's no probable cause that you've done any crime. But if an officer gets imaginative and finds a way to create some kind of reasonable suspicion about you, and it doesn't take much. I mean, you look like someone I heard the description over the radio. And what? Some judge is going to say, well, no, you don't look like the description. And like you said, that sketch orders make all of us look the same. So we have to be careful there. So don't have too much knowledge and play lawyer with a guy with a gun. Just go ahead and comply. Do your best to get through the situation without being shot or killed or handcuffed or thrown to the ground. And if you feel that you were not treated properly, by all means, go file a complaint. Make sure Internal Affairs is looking into it. And then if nothing comes of it, go to your leadership, go to your city council, go to your mayor, and say, hey, look, I'm a citizen here. I don't expect law enforcement to treat me this way. Make someone do something about it. Don't have a situation where these complaints are just filed away and forgotten about until someone like Chauvin kills someone. And then everyone's wondering, how in the world did you stay on the force of all these complaints? Well, no one acted on it. That's why.
you're right, Jimmy. And I guess this is, part of the element that we have to discuss is we have to be willing to stay focused for more than a weekend or a month,
Yes.
or as long as the news is willing to say this is news. We have to figure out what our priorities are, what's at stake for us long term, and we can't manage 25 or 50 different things, but we have to figure out what's important to us as a community, and a community is a collective of families. And clearly, if we look at not even the last generation, but if we look at an entire tier, is obviously being able to protect and keep your family safe is
Right.
very important. Part of that has to do with building families, which is a subject of another show. But when we talk about being able to leverage your political reinforces and understanding the extent of law enforcement and how you deal with that, that's going to be very important. So, for instance, if we look at the difference between the police office, or the police chief, and the sheriff, typically the police chief, to Jimmy's point, is going to be appointed by a mayor. And so, even though the police chief has some power, they're working at the pleasure of the mayor. And so when we're talking about a police chief, we're talking about the law enforcement chief of a city or a municipality. And that person is appointed by the mayor. And so you've got to target or get to the mayor if you're looking at change long term. And you're saying that, the police chief is the problem, but the police chief was appointed by the mayor. So actually, you got a problem not just with that police chief,
Right.
You got a problem with the mayor. When you look at the sheriff, on the other hand, the sheriff has jurisdiction over the entire county. And so if you look at a sheriff, that is an elected official, a public officer. And so when that person is elected,
Tom, and he controlled the jails.
Exactly.
So it's not even treatment of people on the streets. It's even your inmates in the system who are mistreated.
Exactly. But this is an elected officer.
Right.
But these, at the end of the day, are these. The sheriff is a politician first and foremost. I deal with this every week, every month. This is
That's
the
right. That's your
industry that I
industry
am.
that you're in.
Absolutely, the sheriff is a politician. I mean, and they kind of have a similar role, except you're right. The sheriff has jurisdiction over a county domain, which includes his law enforcement agents and
Deputies,
also
yes.
includes the jail. And the jail is housing typically inmates for all of the cities
All of
and
the
the,
cities around the county. That's correct.
exactly. Maybe with the exception if you have a large city. Other than that, that's about it. So you have to understand what Jimmy was talking to a little bit earlier, where to go, what pressure points to push. And at the end of the day, if you're not getting the results that you need, then you figure out how to escalate, whether that is to your local newspapers and putting some political pressure on folks who aren't answering, to the issues that you have going on within the law enforcement agency. Because see, there's a difference, Jimmy, between a community of law enforcement that is protecting and serving a community versus just policing and
Right.
putting their arms and guns around your community. There's a huge difference. And so if you're not getting the results that you need from your mayor or your sheriff, that's when you figure out, okay, we need to escalate and put some public pressure on these folks to make a
And
difference.
so, in part of Black Men Speak is we don't want our young people to grow up fearing law enforcement. We want you to have a healthy respect for them, but not don't fear them. Because I think when we fall victim to fear, um, we need to make sure that we're bucking the current system of those who want us to fear law enforcement. So we need to understand. Let's not teach our kids to fear. Let's teach our kids to respect. But on top of that, when someone gets out of line, by all means, you have to take action. This is what empowers you. When you let the system know that you're not going to take it, when you're not going to be pushed around, you're not going to be disrespected and mistreated by law enforcement. And if you don't say anything, you don't file complaints, you don't follow up, then you're basically encouraging this action to happen to someone else, to continue to happen to you and happen to someone else, and even worse, to maybe your children or your grandchildren. So now it becomes generational. So we have to put a stop to this, Tom, and start standing up for our rights, but in the right way. Burning down our communities is not the right way. It's not the right way to respond to bad policing.
Yeah, Jimmy, I can't disagree with you on that. If you're gonna burn down someplace, don't burn down your own community. Okay, I'm not gonna say what to burn down, but don't burn down your own house.
No, Tom, you go to the wrong area trying to burn something down, and it becomes a war at that point. You're gonna really find out what policing is really about at that point. Because really, from the federal government down to the local level, the entire system, John, from top to bottom, really is designed to protect wealth. So
Of course.
wealthy people get an unfair protection advantage over poor people or middle class people. So we know this. So yeah, you go into the wrong place trying to burn something down, and you're gonna find out really quickly what the response was going to be versus when you just in your neighborhood trying to burn things down. People will stand by and watch you burn yours down, but you go to the wrong side of town trying to burn something down. Yeah, that's not getting ready to happen. You will be shot dead with a match in your hand and some kerosene. So,
Absolutely. So I
well,
mean,
that's
I
my
think that,
prediction. I'm not telling anybody to shoot anybody, but I would imagine that the response would not be kind, going into the wrong areas trying to burn things down.
Jimmy. So, and I guess our last 15 minutes or the last quarter of the
Hmm.
show, let's kind of talk about takeaways and strategies in terms of building leverage and power within our communities in order to keep it safe, in order to protect, our children, our parents, our loved ones, our families, and our friends. I think one thing we have to understand is that they are human beings. You brought up a very
Right.
good point. They're human beings just like everyone else. So you really have no need to be afraid, but you do have to understand how the institution works.
That's correct.
Historically, the good, the bad, and the ugly. You do need to understand how the institution works. You also need to understand, who is responsible for serving and protecting your communities to the degree to which you can hold them accountable, for their mission.
Hmm.
Because I mean, it when it comes to whether it's military or law enforcement, it is very structured. It is very regimented and their mission is very clear. But if you don't understand that, you cannot leverage it and take advantage of it to ensure you're getting what you should get, because they are there ultimately to serve you, not
Right.
to police you. But you have to understand what that means, which means you have to do a little bit of extra work. But
Right.
it makes a difference, Jimmy, when you know the local street cops, I'll call them, that are responsible for your community, building
Build
relationships.
a relationship. That is correct, Tom.
And I think that's where we have to start out. I've seen this over the years. We are a very small segment of the law enforcement community, but a growing segment of the law enforcement community. And I would say that some of you might be very surprised to see that, some of the fastest growth I've seen are in women in the ranks of law enforcement. And I'm seeing that, not that there are a ton of them, but when you look at police chiefs, obviously we're in the Dallas Fort Worth area.
Right.
We've had a police chief, we've had a Latin American sheriff, we've had black police chief, in the Dallas and the Dallas area of the last couple of years. And so even in some of the smaller metropolitan areas, larger municipalities, not so much in the rural areas, you see a growth in women in law enforcement in positions of responsibility. A lot of black women I've seen in the ranks of law enforcement, but we have to become a part of it as opposed to. I just don't think it's going to be a working strategy to go at war against law
No,
enforcement.
Tom, it's not.
It's not going to work. And so what we have to do is, I mean, I have friends who are and who have been in law enforcement. I don't have any family, but I do have family who've been in the military. Understand the institution, learn how to engage, respect and appreciate, but understand the law so that you can protect yourself. And number two, obviously be a part of the institution as well, because I believe that you gain a great deal more if you have more folks who look like you, who are
Right.
responsible for your community. And I think that's where we have to go long term.
And Tom, and you're right. I think you can change the system from within a lot easier than fighting from outside. So we need to be getting involved in law enforcement at all levels, and, as a way. And I'm always amazed at how many, like in Ferguson, for example. I think when they were publicizing that situation with Michael Brown, there were very few officers who lived in Ferguson. Most of them came from other cities, but only and worked in Ferguson, i.e., your white officers. And
Unacceptable. Unacceptable.
but not that Ferguson was keeping anyone out of the force. They just said they couldn't encourage or find black people in the city who wanted to be law enforcement officers.
But Jimmy, I hear what you're saying. But you know what? Corporate America says that same thing. When they can't find, black engineers or black developers, you can't find them because you're not looking for them.
Well, Tom, I can tell you in my city they are actively looking. I mean, I know because I've looked at some of the recruitment efforts. They're bending over backwards trying to find them, and they have recruited a few. They're trying to find more, but it's not easy because it's not an industry, especially with black men, are going into in large numbers.
Of course
So
not.
it looks like we're getting more women, and we do
Yes.
have a sizable number of black women in our police force here.
Yes.
Which is great also. But it may be easier, and it's still a male dominated industry for the most part. And I'm sure that when recruitment efforts are made, that maybe there's a little more focus on trying to find men as opposed to women.
Of
But
course.
maybe we may have to just focus a lot more on black women recruitment as a means to increase numbers within the forces, as opposed to trying to find black men. It may just be easier to find more black women who are qualified to join your police force.
Yeah. I would agree with that. I mean, I definitely, in what I've seen, when we look at the numbers, again, not a large groundswell, but when I look at the numbers, I would say that's probably the fastest growing demographic that I've seen, at least at the surface level.
And also, absolutely, I would recommend for anyone who may be interested, um, join if you're interested in getting into law enforcement, join your local police force. because they need you, your community needs you to be involved and come back to the community as part of the team or the resource that is doing the policing. Don't leave it up to others who do not know you, know your people, know your kith, your kin, your friends, and expect them to be fair in their police. Not to say that it's not possible, but I would much rather someone who's from my neighborhood to have that badge and gun and authority, as opposed to someone who's an outsider who doesn't even live in my city and who's coming to my city bringing whatever bad views they may have about my city and the people in it with them.
Yeah. So, I mean, you have a political strategy. You have to understand that this starts from the top down, whether you're
Right.
talking about a municipal level with a police chief or a county level with a sheriff's office. You have to understand that the political mechanisms that determine the policing within your community. Then also understanding the law, the standard operating procedures, and the guidelines and the mission that they are driven by. So, I mean, whether you use it or not is fine, but to know what you need to have, and then obviously, engaging not just in terms of building relationships with those organizations so you can leverage them and use them to your advantage as opposed to being competitive with them on the other side, which unfortunately has never worked out well for us. And then also being a part of the institution, and to Jimmy's point,
Right.
taking over from within, because we do need folks who are from our communities protecting and serving our communities. And
Correct.
so we actually have to be a part of that solution. Every parent dreads the day, at least most of them dread the day that they have to have, a few conversations, with their children, and especially within our community. And whether it's a young boy or whether it's a young girl, obviously one of those conversations is typically the birds and the bees. But another
Right.
one of those conversations, Jimmy, is dealing with what happens when you get stopped and
Have
you're
that
in a dark.
conversation. Don't
Absolutely.
leave it up to your children to figure it out on their own.
Exactly, because and unfortunately there is no young enough age at this point, because as we found with other things, there is no age perception as to when they may
No.
potentially engage your child. I mean, obviously we've had some very unfortunate incidences where police misunderstood the situation and killed a child who's not even a teenager yet because he had a cap gun.
Right. Yeah, that situation was very unfortunate, Tom. They got way too close on that child. They should have kept their distance. They could have shouted orders from the protection of their car. But when you pull up that close and open the door and get out, and the child has a gun, probably not even aware of what's going on because you rushed them so fast. Um, and the gun didn't have the little red tip on it, which indicates that it's a toy gun as opposed to a real gun. And yeah, that officer got out and and almost instantly pulled his gun out and shot. So we
Right.
don't want those situations to happen. I believe that officer was exonerated. I don't think any charges were filed against that
Exactly.
officer. So
Exactly. And Jimmy, come on. If that child didn't look like us and it looked like somebody else, there is no way that that officer gets exonerated
right.
of all charges. There's just no way.
And so we don't want to put our children in that situation. So yeah, have a talk with them. Some parents, Tom, unfortunately, have the birds and the bees talk with their children. So, but have this talk with your children. Make sure they understand when they go out on these streets how to deal with law enforcement, what to do and what not to do. And if anyone violates your rights, then make sure you follow up and file a complaint. Make sure that complaint is acted on and hold your elected officials accountable if nothing happens. If that cop is not suspended, kicked off the force, or disciplined in some way that's satisfactory to you, then you let next election, when people are asking for your vote, you let them know that they're not going to get it because hey, I'm trusting you with my safety and the safety of my child, my family, and friends and family, and you let me down. So I can't vote for you, but I'll see if the next person who wants to take this job is going to do a better job at taking care of my interests. So we have to be selfish in that respect, Tom. Don't just assume everything is going to work itself out.
Because ultimately, Jimmy, we have to take ownership forgetting what we deserve, out of this system,
Right.
out of this country, politically, socially,
And we
and
just don't do
economically.
enough of it, Tom, which is why people
Exactly.
step on us, they push us to the side, they ignore us, and we're almost a laughing stock among communities in this country. So we have to
Well, I
become
wouldn't say
more.
that. I mean, we
I
we,
would
we
say that,
definitely.
Tom.
mm,
Because I mean, I don't want to get into a long political battle, but we definitely let folks step all over us and mistreat us, and it needs to stop. So,
well, I'll say this much: we have to be more disciplined. We have to be more strategic, and we have to learn that by understanding our self-interest, regardless of the different colors and different flags and different regions, that we hail from, there are certain interests that we all have a vested interest in unifying on and making the right decisions
correct.
from there. So that's all I'll say about that. And Jimmy, I guess it is about that time.
It's
We
about that
are
time, Tom. And if anyone have questions, we're going to get an email account set up here soon. It'll probably be info at bmstalkshow.com. But we'll get
gotcha.
that up and working here probably for next week. So if you have questions, you have topics, you have young people, young men, young women who want to reach out to us for advice, for if they need a mentor, they just have questions about things. Feel free to email us with your questions, your concerns, your comments, and we will follow up with you. We will bring them up on the show, and because we want to hear from you. But and also the other thing, Tom, we want to encourage people to call into the show. We have a phone number. I know it's a lot of numbers, Tom, but
Yeah, it is.
it gets you
They
right into
Jimmy
the show.
Jimmy, they forgot the number by the time they get to the end of
Well, Tom, I mean, everybody who goes to a conference, that dials into a conference, go through the same process. There's a bunch of numbers that always end in pound at the end. So,
it.
but at
And
least
Jimmy,
ours is the same each week.
exactly. And also, Jimmy, just so we won't forget, the first until we change, until someone tells us to do otherwise, the first Monday of every
The
month
first Monday of
is
every
uh,
Wednesday.
is committed to young black men and a subject that is relevant and germane to young black men. This past Monday we talked about, or last Monday, we talked about black men and their money. Prior to that, we talked about young black men and relationships.
Right.
And so we are definitely open to areas that you believe as parents or as young people out there that you'd like to have a conversation or contribute to a conversation on. That doesn't mean we're not, hey, come
Well,
on the show and
well,
join us as well.
well, in December, guys, just to give you the heads up, we have a young brother coming on, Kendall Zachary. He's my nephew, so that lets you know how sharp he is. Young brother who's getting ready to get married. I mean, he has a family, successful, but he's an HR specialist, and so he's going to come on and talk to us about and share some HR things and ways that we can improve our chances of getting hired, things that prevent us from getting hired, but also we're going to take part of the show and sort of, if he'll indulge us, we want to talk to him about his decision to get married, and take on the family responsibilities. And he's a young guy, so I think, it'll be a delightful conversation to hear from some young people less than 30 on the things that they're doing in life, the things he has to deal with and overcome. And, like I said, I'm very impressed with him. He's a very nice young man. He's developed into a very nice, intelligent young man. If I could clone him, Tom, and mass produce him, to make sure that every black woman in America had a Kendall Zachary, I would. So, but my cloning machine is not quite where it should be, so I'll have to wait. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely, Jimmy. So, all right, folks, until next week, next Wednesday, we wish you all have a great week and a great weekend. And we will look forward to seeing you guys on next Wednesday. I guess we will close with a word of prayer.
go out, close us out, Tom.
All right, dear Lord and gracious Father, we come before you, thanking you for blessing us to see another day, thanking you for our health, our strength, our faculties, Father. We ask, Father, that you bless those out there, our families, our friends, our loved ones, that you continue to bless them, bless their health, bless their longevity, that you would keep us focused on the things that you would have us to do. Father, we ask that you would continue to speak through us and to our community so that we may say something that may make a difference in someone, that may inspire someone. And Father, that you would keep our steps ordered in your words on a daily basis and in our daily walking. In your precious name we pray. Amen.
Let the congregation say amen.
All
All
right.
right.
Amen.
All right. We're out to next Wednesday.
Good evening, everyone.